Hello everyone and welcome. Today we're diving into a topic that is just surrounded by myth and, let's be honest, a whole lot of curiosity: female ejaculation. We're going to tuck through all the confusion and give you a really clear, factual look at what the science and the history actually have to say about it. So, let's get into it.
You know, this is something that's been debated by doctors for ages, celebrated in ancient texts, but it's still so misunderstood today. Is it even real? How common is it? And the biggest question of all, isn't it just pee? We hear these all the time, and today, we're going to get you some answers.
So to really break this all down, we're going to start with why it's so misunderstood in the first place. Then we'll take a little trip through its long and pretty controversial history before we get into the actual science of the fluid itself. After that, we'll look at the physical process, and we'll wrap up by talking about the mental blocks that can sometimes get in the way.
All right, so first question up. Is this something that actually happens to a lot of people? For something that's so rarely talked about openly, the numbers might actually surprise you.
Okay, so scientists estimate that somewhere between 10 and 40% of women are actually aware that they ejaculate. Now, the thinking is that it probably happens way more often, but a lot of women just might not even realize it's happening. I mean, it could be anything from a tiny trickle to a much more noticeable gush. So, the main reason for all the secrecy and confusion really boils down to this one single myth: that the fluid is just urine. And that belief has caused so much unnecessary embarrassment. But as we're about to see, the science is crystal clear on this. It is not urine.
So where did all this confusion come from anyway? You might think this is some new discovery. But actually, knowledge about it is ancient. Its journey through history has been, well, complicated. It's been both praised and flat out denied.
In the West, this has been on the books for centuries. Seriously, we're talking references from Aristotle in ancient Greece and Galen, who is basically the father of modern medicine. Fast forward to 1672, and you've got Regnier de Graaf describing it in pretty solid detail. And then in the 20th century, Dr. Ernst Grafengarg, and yep, that's the G&G spot, he linked it directly to that area of arousal way before the term became famous in the 80s.
And it wasn't just a Western thing, not at all. This quote here is from the Kama Sutra, written way back around the 3rd century. It shows that in ancient Eastern cultures, this was just seen as a totally normal, expected part of sex.
But here's where it gets wild. Despite all this history, the 20th century saw this wave of denial from a lot of the medical community. And this wasn't harmless. It had really serious consequences. Women were actually getting completely unnecessary surgeries for what doctors wrongly diagnosed as incontinence, when really, they were just experiencing something totally natural. Now, to see just how different things could be, just look at the Patoro tribe in Uganda. There, it was traditional for young women to be taught how to ejaculate before they got married. It was seen as a really desirable skill, a sign of a healthy and pleasurable sex life. That's a huge contrast to all the shame and confusion we often see today. Okay, so if people have known about this for so long and it's definitely not urine, then what in the world is it? Let's get into the actual science, and we're going to use a really beautiful term for it from Tantric tradition. In Tantra, this fluid is called amrita, which literally means divine nectar. It's seen as something sacred, something purifying that blesses whatever it touches. It's a really positive way to frame the biology, especially compared to how modern medicine has sometimes treated it.
In the hard science, it's undeniable. Chemical analysis completely proves this is not urine. Just look at the data. It has super low levels of urea and creatinine. Those are the main markers for urine. Instead, it has sugar or glucose. And get this, it has PSA, prostate-specific antigen. That's the exact same stuff you find in secretions from the male prostate. Plus, it's usually clear or kind of milky, not yellow.
Okay, so if it has prostatic fluid, where is it coming from? Well, it's produced by what a lot of experts now call the female prostate. It's a whole system of glands and ducts, also known as Skene's glands, that surround the urethra. And this tissue, it's made from the very same embryonic cells as the male prostate, and it includes the area we all know as the G-spot.
All right, so we've covered the what, the when, and the where. Now let's talk about the how. The source material breaks down the whole physiological process behind it pretty clearly.
Now here's a really key concept, something called the P signal. What happens is, at a peak of arousal, that female prostate swells up with fluid, and that puts pressure on the urethra. This creates a feeling that is exactly like needing to pee, but this isn't a sign to stop. It's actually the signal that the body is ready to go.
So the whole process basically looks like this. First, you need a high level of arousal to get that G-spot area fully engorged.
Next, strong, consistent pressure on that spot builds the sensation until, boom, that P signal arrives. The real key here is to relax into that feeling instead of tensing up and holding back. And finally, pushing outward with those pelvic muscles lets the fluid be released.
And look, this isn't just some clinical mechanical process. It's a deeply personal thing. The source shared this story from a reader named Kathy, and she talks about how embarrassed she was at first, but then she saw her partner's reaction, and he loved it. It just highlights how incredibly important acceptance is, both from yourself and from your partner. And that brings us to our final section. Because, understanding the mechanics is one thing, but for a lot of people, the biggest hurdles aren't physical at all. They're all in your head.
So the source material points out some really common mental roadblocks. There's the fear of losing control, maybe a lifetime of feeling embarrassed about bodily fluids, there's performance anxiety, and of course cultural or religious messages that have taught us that really ecstatic sex is somehow wrong or dirty. All of these things can create some pretty powerful walls.
But ultimately, the most important thing to remember is that there should be zero pressure. This is about preference. It's just one option on a huge menu of sexual expression. It is not and should never be a measure of your performance or your worth. The goal is always pleasure and connection, not checking a box.
So really, this all comes down to the power of knowledge. Simply by understanding the history, knowing the science, and learning about the physical process, something that might have once been a source of shame or confusion can be totally transformed into a source of empowerment and pleasure.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Just imagine a world where this kind of knowledge wasn't hidden away or just whispered about, but was openly taught and discussed as a normal part of being human. How different might our relationships with our bodies, with pleasure, and with each other be?